What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my YouTube channel, and in this video I want to break down the exact 3-step process that we've used for our clients over and over again to literally help them get from ground zero to almost 7 figures in sales in almost less than a year. Now, before we do get into this, I just want to say this isn't some sort of glamorized marketing tactic or some sort of strategy that will help you get extreme results in a quick time frame. This is simply a guide and a framework that will help you align your goals with your education business to ensure that you can have sustainability and scale this to the ideal position that you want to. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. Starting off, what I want to do is I want to lay out exactly how these 3 phases are divided up. Starting out, the first phase is to basically sell and serve just 10 customers. Now, I'll explain why in a minute. And each phase is crucial in order for you to be successful in the next stage. The second phase, and this is a phase I like to call the growth flywheel stage. And this is where, we get to a little bit more of a place where we can start picking things up and try to aim to get to that 6-figure level. And then lastly, this is where we really want to dial things in and try to get to predictable sales or at least the 7-figure mark, right? Now, each phase, again, like I mentioned, is very crucial in order for us to get to the next one. So breaking down each one individually, the first phase is, again, to sell and serve 10 customers. Now, the reason why this is so important is because usually when we look at an education business, a lot of the time we overlook the idea of how much structure we actually need in order to grow this thing. And oftentimes when we're starting out, especially for the first time, we don't necessarily see the second order consequences of things that we might be doing today that will affect us maybe a year down the line. So one thing we need to do is we'd rather start off small and start off slow, but make sure we have the proper foundations in order for us to get to a 6 or 7-figure level. And oftentimes when I see creators struggling to get to that 6-figure level, the problem usually lies in phase 1. And that's why it's so important. So why 10 customers, right? So let's just say, for example, you go out of the way and, let's just say off the bat, for argument's sake, you just get 100 customers. Because you don't have an infrastructure in place to get all 100 or deliver a service or training or whatever it might be to these 100 people in an effective way, the chances of each person, all 100 people buying this product or service from you, getting to the finish line will probably be pretty slim. Maybe 20% get over, maybe 10%. What we want to do is we want to ensure that 100% of these people are able to make this transformation that they came to us in the first place. And what this does is it builds your brand and trust, which is one of the main components that goes into selling a training or product or course in this day and age, especially because there's so much competition out there and you're most likely not the only person in your niche doing what everyone else is, unless you're offering a super unique kind of offer or training. For most, we're usually up against other people who are already probably doing this, right? So what we need to do is off the bat is to start off small, and there's nothing wrong with starting with just 10 customers and taking it easy, right? But again, this is kind of a round number, but the idea behind this is what's a number for us that we can ensure that we can get 100% of people to this kind of end mark. And if there's that one person kind of falling a little back, what's the problem with, trying to get that person to this finish line? And usually those are the key components that you can find early on throughout this process that will make phase 2 and phase 3 a lot easier, because you've already plugged up those holes that will prevent you from making, a fatal mistake in your business's growth. So again, you want to start off small and you want to leverage these 10 people to get to that next stage, which is phase 2. Now, before you get to phase 2, I have this one rule that I like to use before moving on to that next stage. And it's called the 1, 10, and 3 rule. And basically what that means is you have one offer that's making 10K per month for 3 months consecutively. Now, if you're able to accomplish that and do that for 3 months consecutively, that basically ensures that you have a direct path to getting to 6 figures. All you have to do now is put the pieces in place to get there, because you've nailed the most important part, which is nailing your offer, getting people to buy from you at a consistent level. And oftentimes, that's one of of the hardest things to do in the long term, is because we don't have, again, these foundations nailed. So now we want to make sure, how can we take and leverage these 10 people to get us to that next stage? So we passed this rule, we made sure all these boxes are checked, and now we can move on to phase 2. Now, when moving on to phase 2, which is more so of building out your growth flywheel, a lot of this is not really marketing focused. It's more so focusing on your business model and making sure everything in phase 1 is a lot more bulletproof. And get into what I mean in just a second. So just like any other business, an education business needs its own business model. How often are you selling this program? What's its contingencies? What's the time frame in what, you're going to get someone to the end result? Is it 30 days? Is your program for 60 days, 90 days? Like, all of these kind of little contingencies end up making up how long it's going to take us to get to that end stage. So before getting into the growth part of it and trying to accumulate a lot of sales, we want to nail the fulfillment engine of this business, which is, again, similar to the business model side, right? But more so on the delivery. And the reason why the delivery is super important is it'll tie into the business model in just a second, Anil. So let's just say this is the starting point of when someone purchases from you, they enter your product or your training, whatever it might be. And this is the end part or end phase when they're leaving your product. And this is why it's super crucial to map this out visually, is because you want to see how long is it going to take for someone to reach this end stage. Obviously, along the way, you're going to be working with them, or this training is going to provide them with, X, Y, and Z resources, however your offer is structured or product is structured. But you want to ideally figure out what is it, or what's the time frame that gets someone from this stage to this stage effectively. Is it 6 months? Is it 3 months? Is it even 1 month? And once you've figured that out and identify that, you can start looking a little bit at your fulfillment engine and see, ideally, how can we make sure that our product can cut this time frame down? Because one of the most important parts of a value equation is how fast and effectively you can deliver someone the result. Because if someone can deliver me the same results in a short amount of time frame, I'm most likely to go with that person. And this is something, again, that we don't often think about when we're building out an education business. So we have that mapped out, and we have all this whole process that lead to this end stage. And it might be a little rocky and it might be a little random. What we want to do is, how can we make it a little bit more predictable, where we know exactly how many steps it's going to take in order for you to take X, Y, and Z person in order to get to this final stage. And you might have 6 stages, 7 stages, and along the way, you want to, again, make sure you can patch up any holes or missing kind of ties that will prevent someone not reaching that goal. But once you've nailed that down, now you can start to think about, okay, like, what's the business model that we can go ahead and use for this education business? And usually, to get to a 6-figure level, there's usually 3 main things required. There's one, an offer, and only one offer at a time, because you don't want to sell your second offer until you've dialed in your first. Because the one thing you don't want to do is cause decision fatigue for your audience. When you're able to just focus all in on one offer, you're able to not only deliver them better service, but you're also able to make sure your audience is all focused in on this one thing that you have to offer. So you have one offer, you have one channel, which is the same channel that you probably use to get those initial 10, 20, or 30 customers. And then you have one avatar, which is exactly who you're selling to. And over time, you'll get to identify more pain points and more characteristics of who this person actually is that you're selling to. Now, once you have these 3 kind of components in place, you can now start mapping out exactly how is it that we are going to drive sales effectively for this business. Now, the one thing I'd recommend, and one of the most important channels for you to leverage communication, is email. You want to make sure that you're able to take people from social platforms like Instagram and YouTube and all these social platforms, which are all great, but start bringing these people into your email list, which is going to be one of your most powerful engines in the long term, but you want to start building that out super early. So you have all these audiences and all of this reach on these channels, but let's just say Instagram and YouTube was to just decide to shut down for a few months, which probably isn't likely, but you never know. For example, like Elon Musk just bought Twitter, and there's a whole lot of, randomness going on there. So again, that's just one indication of why you want to go from renting your audience to making sure you're owning your audience, and that comes with email because you can reach anyone through email at any time, and it's more of a one-on-one communication. So now you're dipping a little bit into the marketing point, and all you want to do is, based on however many people you have on your email list and how many people you have on your audience, you want to start bringing a lot more exposure to this offer that you have. So before, in order for you to get maybe 10 to 30 customers or so, or whatever that number was in that phase one, it probably didn't take as much exposure as you'll need in order to get to the six-figure level. And exposure is just another word of traffic. How can you get more people to look at what you have to kind of offer to them? So the bigger question that comes into play at this point is trying to understand what your actual conversion rate, right? Because you'll have a certain number of people on your email list or a certain number of people that follow you, but we don't know how many of them will convert. And this is where a lot of, marketing essentially is trial and error. So the sooner you can test something out and, take it to market and go to your audience and see your kind of metrics and numbers, you'll be able to gauge and understand what things we need to do better moving forward. Now, carrying on with this model here, bringing more exposure and having more traffic and increasing your conversion rate, all this ties back to the launch model. And again, this is one of those models that is really helpful because especially for a up and coming business, especially in the online and education space, this launch model gives you a really high kind of cash injection into your business. And what that allows you to do is you can, first of all, you won't be doing yourself a disservice when you're working and spending your time, working with X, Y, and Z number of people. And the other thing is it keeps you afloat because over the next few kind of months, now you have this cash flow that will allow you to consistently build up until your next launch or whatever model you kind of pivot to if you need to, right? So if the idea is each launch that you do would likely be better than the last one. And there's multiple reasons why each launch does better. And obviously a lot of that has to come with how well you execute the product. But in order for you to, again, come out with higher conversion rates and improve everything, you need to build up multiple kind of cases within the product and business, right? And that can be leveraging testimonials from the last one, making sure that you're showing the behind the scenes of how you're working with everyone, just kind of doing all of the necessary things to build up that fear of missing out on the second time around you come out with this product. Now, again, we don't want to use any, sleazy sort of marketing tactics. All this is doing is just building trust because we want to show people organically through what we're doing that this product works and these are the results that people are getting. And if we can nail that, most likely what we've seen is each launch ends up doing better than the last one. And eventually you'll kind of grow out of this launch model, which will kind of go into phase 3 of scaling this into a 7-figure and beyond business. But kind of touching a little bit more on the launch model, especially if you're doing a launch for the first time, I want you to think of it as a marketing runway. And I think I went over this in the last video or so, but the idea is when a plane takes off, a plane usually has some sort of runway to gain that momentum in order to take off at the right trajectory to make sure it, reaches its KPIs and, its miles or whatever altitude it needs to in order to keep on track, right? And the same thing goes for your launch. As you're kind of progressing towards the launch date, which is, let's just say this last kind of thing here, launch date, you want to be progressing through and making sure that each kind of day and week that goes by leading up to this launch, you're doing all the necessary things required from your marketing end to generate all of the buzz and hype necessary to, hit that mark or your goal that you're looking for. And, it starts all the way back from, how many people do you have on your wait list? How many of these people submitted an application? How many of these people willingly reached out to you as an inbound lead saying that they're ready to buy? How many of these people are opening your emails? How many of these people are actually engaging with your emails, meaning they're replying to your emails and they're clicking any sort of resource or link that you include inside the email. These are all kind of levers and indicators for us as marketers to determine, how far along are we coming in order to hit our marks on the launch day. And obviously, if your wait list is not at the size you need to in order to come across your conversion rate, and let's just say for argument's sake, an industry average kind of conversion rate can vary anywhere from, on a very low scale, right? Maybe anywhere from 20 to 30%. If you have, a really great offer, great case studies and, testimonials and a great sales process and marketing process and having all those things combined and packaged well, that conversion rate can increase drastically. And we've seen conversion rates fluctuate anywhere from 50 to even 80%. But sometimes, it's fine even if you're starting at a low conversion rate. Obviously, that's not the goal. We want to aim and try to have the highest conversion rate we can. When you're doing your initial launch, there's no real ideally metric to go off of, and you're kind of discovering your metric. And again, it just comes back to trial and error. And the sooner you kind of do this and you do it to the best of your ability, and let's just say you still walk out with a 30% conversion rate, great. We learned, we know our metrics now, we know how much data we have, and now our goal is to increase our conversion rate to 50%, 60% for next time. And again, it just comes down to eventually nailing it to a science. And every creator and every product, every offer, every launch will be different depending on what you bring to the table and the type of audience that you're communicating with. So all of these levers will be different, but it's your job as the marketer and business owner to understand how all of these work and make sure you're on track. So by the time you reach, maybe a week before the launch date, you're more than confident to launch this and hit your goals that you set out to do, right? So whether you're hosting a webinar here, whether you're sending out emails leading up every single day to the launch. And if one of the common questions I get is how long this launch runway should be. If you're doing it for the first time, I'd recommend trying to do it for at least, 20 to 30 days. 30 is a little bit more aggressive, and you have to have a really well thought out plan because you also don't want to lose interest over time, because if you extend a deadline too far out, people will start to lose interest and they'll start, maybe buying and investing into other products and courses or whatever it might be. So you're also, even if Michael Jordan isn't doing the training himself, most people will probably buy because of his expertise. And this is one thing that I've seen over and over again. Most creators end up declining when they actually should be only increasing their expertise. And that goes for any industry, even for myself. And, whether you're in marketing, you're in sales, whether you're in real estate, wherever industry you're in, there's always going to be a different level to tap into. And that's what most people will be bought into, is seeing you as an expert, sticking to your principles that got you in this place to teach in the first place, and honing down on them. So when you're able to, again, build these systems around you that allow you to focus on your strengths, you'll start noticing a pattern where people will start being more attracted to you because they see that you're not focused on these things and you're focused all in on this one thing, which is your craft. So that's one of the main concepts you want to understand at this stage. Now, when it comes to a team and achieving predictability, let's get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty, right? And that basically means, what are the KPIs that we need to track? Now, KPIs is short for key performance indicators. And let's just say at this stage, we're aiming for predictability, right? In order to achieve predictability, we need to reverse engineer how to achieve our goals. Now, let's just say our financial goal is to reach, $1 million per month. Actually, we'll just kind of make the number a little bit smaller for argument's sake. But let's just say our goal is to reach 100,000 per month. 100,000 per month. Now, in order for us to get to 100,000 per month, we need to identify what is the price point that we're selling our training or program at, right? And let's just say, again, for argument's sake, it's $2,000. Now, all we have to do, and this is kind of saying this with a grain of salt, when I say all we have to do, there's obviously a lot of work that goes into it, but we want to simplify everything and not make everything too complex, kind of on a time scale too. And you have to find a good balance. And that's where you kind of need to also trust your intuition. But unless you have a really dialed in plan for 30 days, I'd recommend starting out with 20. And ideally, eventually you want to launch within the fewer, possible days you can. And for our clients, we typically take, anywhere from 30 to 45 45 days to launch just because we have a super dialed in process for it. But again, it just comes down to trial and error and seeing how many days you actually need to launch and what you're doing leading up every single day for that launch on the front end, on social media, in terms of content, in terms of the emails you're sending and the events you're hosting. All of these things leading up to the event are super crucial, right? So eventually, if you execute this launch model, maybe on the first launch, you'll be able to cross 6 figures. If not on the first one, maybe on the second. But eventually this model will get you to 6 figures without having a much of a complex sales process right off the bat. And again, this is you just kind of, taking that next step into the business and making sure you're fundamentally, bulletproof. And once you've accomplished this stage and you've done this process a few times, you'll eventually notice that you've outgrown this. And now it's time for phase 3, which is predictability. Predictability, and more so if we're talking in terms of numbers, it's 7 figures, right? At that scale. Now, in order to reach that type of level for an education business, we need to have a ton of processes and systems. And that's mainly the basic kind of anchor of, reaching this stage is you won't be able to do everything on your own. And this is where systemizing and automations kind of come into play. But the better systems and processes and team that you have around you, the much more efficient and effective, not only your business, but the results your clients will, be able to get. So the biggest thing over here is not really a tactical or marketing or, structural approach. Obviously, there's things that you change and the business model kind of pivots as well. But when you get to this stage, it's more so of a mindset and paradigm shift for yourself as a business owner. Because technically what got you to 6 figures won't get you to 7. And that's the common theme that I see when, most creators in education business get here is they try to keep, fueling the same processes over here, trying to, target this goal, but eventually, they just fall short or they end up, going back to getting a little bit too aggressive, which causes, those second order consequences that, end up leading to businesses kind of declining. And those are things that we want to avoid. So when we say systems and processes, like what does all of that mean? I'm pretty sure they seem like, a few buzzwords that you see going around, but what is actually a system? And a system is more so of, at least in this case, the way we're kind of defining it is a system allows you to focus on your strengths. Now, if we go back to phase 1, there's a reason why someone trusted you and bought your service. The reason why they bought your product or education program, whatever, is because they look at you as an expert at what you do. And oftentimes what happens at this stage is because you as an expert are now also a business owner, in this case, an education business owner, your focus starts to drastically shift. Meaning you start wearing multiple hats inside the business and you try to do everything. You're doing the sales, you're doing the marketing, you're doing the content, you're just all over the place. And it goes back to the same principle we talked about in terms of leveraging just one channel in phase 1 and phase 2 in terms of content and stuff. The same thing applies here in terms of where you're focused on as a business owner. And you always want to focus on your strengths and delegate your weaknesses. The things that you might not like doing or the things that you probably aren't the greatest at. And that's where you want to plug those holes and solely focus on this part right here. The one thing about education businesses is that it's really tied back down to you as a creator. And when you're reaching this stage, the one thing you want to try to do is let your work and this kind of frame training or product or course market itself and having its own kind of legacy here, where the dissociation, even if you're not part of the course or the training itself, people will still buy because they understand the value that your training alone brings to the table. Now, for example, let's just say Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan was to come out a training on basketball and how to become a better player, is to understand, okay, how many people do we need to come to our landing page, or how many people do we need to make sure click our link, right? And then how many people, well, before we even get to that, right, kind of jumped there myself, was how many sales do we need in order to get to that goal? At this point, you want to shift your business model a little bit and get more into having a sales process built in, which maybe I'll dive into in another video. But for the sake of this one, I'll just kind of go over a little briefly. How many sales do we need? How many appointments do we need to have booked on the calendar? What's our average conversion rate in terms of the appointments? So if we have X amount of appointments, how many of them will convert? Are we having a 7 out of 10 ratio? Out of 10 calls, we know 7 people will convert. We need to identify that. And then how many leads do we need to have come into our system, which is more so coming from the traffic side, in order to set X amount of appointments, right? And this can go back down to, the nitty gritty, and you can really boil this down to like the smaller scales, but these are some of like the main kind of metrics. And as you can see, each one ties into the next one. And if we can just structure this the right way, now we know that, okay, in order for us to get to this goal, we need to make sure that we're having, back to the traffic part, if we have an organic system, that we need to have 2 videos posted per month. Two videos posted per week on YouTube. We need to post 7 times a week on Instagram. We need to post 7 times a week on TikTok. And then maybe we scale that up a bit as our goal gets a little bit bigger, right? And maybe we need to double down on this. Maybe we need to start optimizing a little bit more instead of trying to aim for higher numbers, but improve our conversion rate, right? And these are things that over time, as long as you have the base fundamentals of what your KPIs are and what you're tracking for, over time, you want to keep improving each metric. You want to improve the number of appointments you're setting, the number of show-ups for every call you're having, the number of, conversion rate, and so on and so forth. But again, this is kind of going into the nitty-gritty of the whole process, but eventually everything boils down to how can we systemize this whole business, right? And then for each stage, you'll probably need a team, which is most likely you'll need a sales team, you'll need a copywriter to help you kind of write out your content, maybe a content person to help you, record or edit the content, have an operations person to manage all of this, have a virtual assistant or VA to help you with the small hanging fruit, and then, or the lower hanging fruit, I'm trying to think on the top of my head, the appointment setters, people that maybe even help you deliver the training, so coaches, right? So these are kind of like the main pillars, and these are probably the same set of people that you see across mostly any company, right? There's an operations department, there's a marketing department, there's a sales department, there's a fulfillment department, and you want to understand as a business from where you stand, where do you want to focus on as an expert, which for most of you as a coach, as a person who's creating the training, you'd want to focus on your skill, right? And everything else, you'd kind of want to just delegate out to other people that are experts in their craft. And if you nail that system, eventually you'll have that runway of even potentially tapping into that 8-figure mark. But, obviously trying to do all of this and package all of this comes down to the same thing and same idea of having processes. Now, before I go and I end the video, the one thing I also want to leave you guys with is to lastly understand that in order to excel in the education business, or really this goes for any business, you want to keep this one thing in mind, right? You want to lead with a unique voice. And if you look at any of the most successful creators in our time, such as Mr. Beast, Logan Paul, and all of these people who have really boiled down the science of being a creator and capturing attention and monetizing attention and doing all of that, they all have a unique voice. And for most of, us, we're probably going to be bumping heads with a lot of other people in the same industry. Now, the market share is probably still big enough for everyone. Now, obviously, you'd want to make sure that you're capturing all of the market share eventually as a business owner, especially if that's your goal, to strive to be the best in the industry. But overall, there's a ton of market share to go around for everyone. But you want to make sure that from day one, you lead with a unique voice. What are the experiences that led you to be where you are today? What is your story that makes you different from everyone else? What are the results and stuff that you've accomplished that set you apart from the rest? These are all components that build up and create this unique character that people will be attracted to. So the one thing I tell people, especially in this space, is you don't want to mimic what everyone else is doing, because most of the time people are just figuring out what their next step is anyway. So they're just doing their sort of trial and error. And when you're too focused within your industry, industry and you're trying to mimic what everyone else, especially within your industry, is doing, you start to become no different than them. Instead, what you want to do is look outside your space and look at what other people are doing. Could be in sports, could be in real estate, if you're in marketing, whatever it might be, but just look outside your space. Try to get inspiration on how these other giants in these other space are positioning themselves. And when you try to take something from there and you take a little bit from here and you package up this unique experience, you become this kind of category of one in your own space. And that's what you want to strive for. So I hope you guys enjoy this video. I'll drop in the description of this video the PDF laying out every phase, just however we talked, in a much more detailed manner. So if you want to reflect and go back to that, you can do so. But other than that, I'll see you guys in the next video.